getting input and working with people. How do you, when you're working with like a developmental editor?
Oh, Michael Whelan, that was the cover artist.
Oh, perfect.
I forgot. Michael Whelan, yeah.
Michael Whelan, yes, that sounds right. How must formulate my question? How do you balance like taking their direction and understanding what they're saying to make it better while also sticking to your vision? Like if they say something that's like, no, that doesn't really work with what I want, or they say something you're like, yep, that needs to be changed. Like, how do you balance that creative input?
It can be tricky. I think it helps if you kind of, I'm going to say it helps if you can mock up a cover before you hand it off to them. Sometimes that's too much direction, but they'll let you know. I think like an example of this one, this is actually not computer generated. This is a photograph of a paper sculpture that was done by a guy named Calvin Nichols, who's a Canadian paper sculptor. And he just takes a block of paper and an X-Acto knife, and he just works at it. And so we used this image, we licensed it from him, and we used it with his permission. But for me, this one was really easy because I wanted a floral crown. It was kind of, it's been a trend. It comes and it goes with fantasy books where you might have like a single object on the cover, whether it's a crown or a sword or a throne or something like that. And then you have the title treatment. And I felt like that was an easy enough concept. Floral crown, white cover, and then a fantasy-esque title treatment, so that immediately it kind of shouts out to you, oh, this is a fantasy book. That was the hope, at least. And so, yeah, part of that was just really having specific design. If we had done something that was more of a scene from the book, I think that's a little bit harder because what's going on in my head is going to be very different than what's going on in their head. And there's probably going to be more rounds of revisions. The big thing, actually, with the second book, War of the Hounds, was not so much the concept, but it was just getting the color correct. Because we were trying to figure out, okay, we now have two books. They need to look good next to each other on the shelf, and we're going to do more books. So we need to make sure that we kind of plan that out now versus, each time trying to reinvent the wheel. So we came up with a color scheme for the entire series, and there were ideas that were good, but maybe didn't work with each individual title. And so we had to kind of go back and forth. So we worked out the color scheme. And I think that if you work with a professional, they're going to take feedback, but they're also going to push back, which is what you want to welcome. You want to welcome that, because occasionally they're going to say, well, I really don't like the placement on this, or I feel like it needs to be larger or smaller. And you go, okay. I'm not going to fight them too much on that. So I think it's like a gentle friction. It's like you want just enough friction that you get to the right place, but not so much that you're fighting about it, Yeah. Well, and even inside the Dryad's Crown, we have 12 full-page illustrations by a Filipino artist by the name of Daniel Irving Desna. And so once again, I'm working with artists. That actually wasn't too bad because for several years I was writing direction to artists as a comic book artist. So, like for instance, here's one of the images for people that are watching on YouTube. We've got the image here. And it's, it's a woman holding a sword, standing by her bed as this shadowy creature is approaching. I think Daniel mocked up probably about 20 different positions of where the woman was standing in the room, the angle of kind of the camera angle of where she was versus where the shadow was. And once we had that kind of set, the rest was pretty easy. So I do think that if you're working with someone who has the time, having a mock-up is always going to be better than just being like, I'm going to pay you a bunch of money and then you're going to send me the final version. Like it's harder to make edits at that point.
I'm definitely one to where it's like I don't draw, or I'm creative in a lot of ways, but like that's one area where it's just like, nope, can't do it. But I feel like I have a good enough eye. I just don't know how to get it there. So it's definitely one of those, like, I'm going to tell you kind of what I'm envisioning. And then generally what happens is if I have someone come back to me with something, and I'm like, that's just way better than in my head. So,
Oh, you live for those moments as a comic book writer where you create this sort of convoluted scene and then they send it back to you and you're like, yep, that was how it was supposed to be. That was so much better. And that's what a good collaboration looks like. And I think it can happen with covers. I think it happens with interior art. And it also depends just on the timing. There's some fantasy cover artists who their schedule is so backed up that they're just not going to have time to go back and forth with you on an idea. It's like, this is the idea. I've got 20 more people that are waiting. Here you go. And I'm out.